All right, hello everyone. So today we're going to be doing a recap lesson on how to set up the Raspberry Pi to work around some of the issues that we were having with getting it set up on the 64 gig cards. So I've started off with 128 gig SanDisk micro SD, SanDisk Ultra in case it matters, and I'm booting up my Pi here. So just giving that a minute to come up on stream, and then we should see the desktop show up here. Now, during the flashing process, I did set the host name and the username and the Wi-Fi credentials and the time zone. But we've seen that all in class, so that's just the same procedure. Just set it to something unique to your Pi. Am I getting a video signal? Oh, there we go. The pins are just loose. Okay. So, first things first, in case we need to know what our IP address is, first we could hover over this and it would tell us. There we go. But the other way you can do that is you go into the console or Control-Shift-T. I'll do that too. Control-Shift-T. Control-Shift-T. Control-Alt-T? Oh. Okay, sorry, I thought it was Control-Shift-T. Okay, so let's do ifconfig. And there we go. That's, oh, sorry, wrong mouse there. That's got, if we scroll up, it's got our ETH0. So that's our physical LAN connection, which isn't plugged into anything right now. It's got LO, which is our local loopback. So that will always be 127.0.0.1. And it's got wireless LAN here, which, as we can see, I've gotten my 192.168 address from the inside of my network. That will always be different on your Pis. So depending on what network you're connected to and what IP address the DHCP server happens to assign you, this will be different. So take note of your IP address for the rest of this exercise. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is, before we can do any updating, is we have to set the time. Now, I'm connecting this on my home network, so it's there's nothing blocking the NTP daemon. So as we can see here, it actually did update the time. Otherwise, it would actually be showing the time that that version of the Raspberry Pi operating system image was published. So this would be possibly 100 days out of date or something like that, and I won't be able to update. So I'll show you the command, but I'm not actually going to run it because I don't have to. Okay, hang on. First things first, we got to set the keyboard type because I can't type quote characters. When I type a quote, I get an @ sign. So first things first, if you're running into that issue, that's because you have to set the keyboard. So we'll do sudo raspi-config. And in here, let's go down to localization options and set the keyboard. And we want to set that to generic 104 key PC. And English US is fine because I don't need any accented characters. And let's go with the default. And I don't really need the compose key. I can always come back and change this later on if I want to. And no, let's not enable that. You can. That is pretty handy sometimes if you want. So if you want from the login screen to be able to kill the X server and drop out to the console, that's what this is useful for. You hit Control-Alt-Backspace from anywhere in the GUI and it will drop you back out to the console. But we don't really need that right now, so I'm just going to set it to no. Okay. Now, if I do finish... Okay, so now I should be able to type the command. Sudo date-s quotes. There we go. 2024-1022. And it is 20 o'clock? Yeah, 20 o'clock, 3700. So if I were to run that, it would update my clock to be close enough to the current time that I'll be able to update my system. If you were on, say, the school network or a corporate network of some kind that was blocking NTP, you might have to run this. Or in the situation where there's no internet, you might want to run this. Although, if there's no internet, you're not going to be worrying about updates. But you might still want the clock set. So, in the absence of a network, this is how you set the clock. Okay, so I'm going to delete that because I don't actually want to run it. And let's start running our updates. Okay, so we always want to start with a sudo apt-get update to make sure that we've updated our repositories before we do any kind of either an upgrade where we're upgrading all of our applications, or even just when we're installing an application. Sometimes if you try and go and install something, it will say, hey, I don't know what that application is. And then you go and you update your repositories, and then you try it again, and now it knows what that is. So always start with a sudo apt-get update. It's not actually updating your system, it's just updating the repositories. And then the next step we do is sudo apt-get upgrade. Now, as we did talk about in class, apt and apt-get are functionally the same. The apt command is a little bit more interactive, whereas the apt-get command is a little bit more script friendly, I guess, would be a good way of putting it. So I'm going to keep using apt-get, but use either one. They're both functionally mostly the same, but they do have slightly different parameters. So you'll see me continue to use this one, but they're interchangeable for the most parts. Okay, so this is going to check and see all the packages that I've got in my system. And actually, let's full screen this so we can see a little bit more of it. Okay, so that's a lot of packages that's going to upgrade. It's telling me about all the different dependencies that have, all the different packages that have updates, as well as any of their packages or their dependencies that also need to be updated. So I'm going to tell it, yes, go ahead, and we're going to let it do its thing. And as we just saw, the estimate dropped from about 52 minutes to 5 minutes, so that's a little bit more realistic. Yeah, we'll let it run it do its thing. So when this is done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and reboot and just make sure, first of all, that my GUI actually starts up again, because the issue that we were having before is when you take a freshly imaged Pi and you try and apply upgrades, it would apply the upgrades, but then when it would reboot, it would just sit and it would freeze up on the Raspberry Pi OS desktop screen, which tells us that the operating system is booting. So the image, the card isn't fully corrupt. There is an operating system on it, but when it tries to boot, it starts up it starts up the underlying Linux, and that works, and then it goes and tries to start up the Xdaemon, and that's where it's hanging because we see it freezing up on the GUI launch. So one of the things that we did find is if you pressed Control-Alt F1, you could escape out of that frozen startup screen onto a secondary console. And the error message that it was showing was something about the Light Display Manager being corrupted, which frankly wasn't something that we were about to try and sort in class and shouldn't have been an issue in the first place. So that's what we're trying out right now, is we're trying it with a better card and seeing if when we go through the same process, if there's any issues. And I'm expecting that, based on what we're suspecting, this should go ahead just fine. It'll finish installing, it'll boot back up into the GUI, and then we'll just continue on with the installation. Okay, so we got about 2 minutes left. So the other things that we're going to do after we reboot, we've got to install Apache. We've got to install MySQL/MariaDB. We're going to install Samba so we can do Windows file sharing. And VSFTPD. Not necessarily, like, we're not probably not going to use FTP unencrypted very much, but it's good to know about it. So we'll enable that server and set it up. We'll install Tomcat for the JSP portion of the course, which we will need. And phpMyAdmin, so that we have a convenient tool to interact with our database server. Oh, and Webmin, because that's a very handy way of configuring our Linux system. How are we doing there? Almost done. About a quarter left. Three seconds left. Oh, it's jumping a bit. Come on, you can do it. 5% left. Oh, are we almost? Okay, just a little bit more. Come on. My internet connection is struggling today. Oh, there we go. Almost done. Come on. Okay, there we go. So now it's just going to take a minute to install everything. almost done. Last little bit. Must have been doing something that updated the HDMI. Almost. That should be one of the last things there. Come on, you can do it. There we go. Okay. So, first things first, let's reboot it and see if it still comes back up. All right. So that rainbow is the rainbow is the first thing you see whenever you boot the Pi. Alright, so now it's trying to boot the GUI, and this is where it would normally freeze. That's promising. There we go. Alright, problem solved. So, yes, using a better card does actually make all the difference. So, let's continue with the installation. Okay, so now that we've done apt-get, update, and upgrade, let's start off with Apache. So sudo apt-get install Apache 2. Oops. I'm going to change the font on this because I think if I can barely read it, chances are the people on stream can barely read it. Preferences. There's our font. And let's bump that up to, I don't know, let's try 20 at this point. A little better. I think that should be bigger though. Let's do 25. There we go. That's a little better. Okay, so we're going to start by installing Apache. go. Awesome. There we go. Okay, so now let's check a few things. So first we want to check and see, is Apache running, which it should be by default. Yep, it's running. So now we can confirm that with the browser. Now, one thing to note is this isn't quite the same as actually testing from an external machine that we can see the server, but this is good enough to at least confirm that the daemon is running. But if we wanted to make sure that, for example, our machine was actually receiving connections from the outside world and that the Linux firewall wasn't blocking anything like that, that's where we might actually want to try going to a separate machine and accessing it. But just to make sure that Apache is serving pages up, this will be good enough. So we go 127.0.0.1, which is the same as localhost. There we go. So we get the Apache 2 Debian default page, which tells us that yes, there is an Apache server running at that address, but it doesn't have anything configured right now. So the other thing we'll do before we move on from that is we'll use vi to open up /var/www. Actually, hang on. Let's move the file. ls var www. I think it should have an htdocs in there. No, HTML. Sometimes, depending on the flavor of Linux, sometimes it'll be called htdocs. Sometimes it'll be called HTML. Sometimes it's just the www folder. There's a few different names that it can go by. So anyway, let's move /var/www.html/index.html, and let's change that to index.old. So it won't. Oh, I need to sudo that because I do not own that folder. Okay, so now if I were to go over here and reload that page, it'll 404. There we go. Oh, not quite a 404 because it does have stuff in that folder. So when I request the contents of a folder that doesn't have an index, it will actually give me, by default, it'll give me the listing of that folder. So now, and we want to sudo it because I can't. Again, I don't own that folder, so I need sudo to elevate myself, and then we'll use vi as the text editor. You can also use nano, but I don't know. I kind of like vi, so we'll go with that one for now. I'll just throw some quick tags in here. Okay, that should be good. So we'll, what I did here, oops. Oh, oops. Oh, it saved it, okay. So just a few things before I exited vi. So when I started vi, in order to put it into insert mode so I could start typing, I pushed the I key, and now it's in insert mode. So now I can type some stuff, and I can delete stuff. And if I press escape, that'll exit it out of insert mode, and now I see that stuff did disappear. So now that I'm out of insert mode, I can press the colon character, and I can either use W to write, or I can use WQ if I want to write and quit, which I do. So let's run that, and there, it just saved the changes to my file. So now, when I go into my browser and refresh this, if I go to the root of my localhost, it should see index.html, and it should automatically return that to me. There we go. So I get the HTML that I just put in var HTML, or var www HTML. And so that's a special folder where anything that I put in there will be exposed to the internet by the web server. So if I were to put in, say, another common file is robots.txt. And let's just pull up the syntax for that one real quick because I can never remember it offhand. Oh, need to join the Wi-Fi, that's why. Okay, so the things that we want to add in here are now, you don't have to create this file. I'm just creating it as an example because one of the things that we might want to do on a website sometimes is tell web spiders like Google not to search our site. Like, let's say, for example, that our site generates massive amounts of reporting data that we don't really want indexed. It's just a bunch of verbose pages that would just waste space on the index. So that might be one reason. Or maybe we've got a forum that's just got lots and lots of stuff and we don't want it to be searchable for some reason. So what this does is it says it doesn't matter what spider you are. So user agent star, whether you're Google or Metacrawler or Bing or whoever, all robots are disallowed from the root of this site. There are other directives that you can define in here if you want to make a more complex set of rules, but this is the basic, hey, don't index my site. So we'll save that. And now, if I go up here, I should also see that file. Typically, humans won't download that file. That's why it's called robots.txt. It's for the robots, not for the humans. There is also another convention called humans.txt, which is more of an optional thing that people will do if they want to provide some kind of credits for the site, some details about who the humans are who worked on it. So I'm targeting robots.txt. There we go. So when I go to robots.txt, I just get the file back. And same with if we put JPEGs in there, if we put any CSS in there, if we put any JavaScript in there, if we put some folders, some kind of structure in there, by default, it's all accessible. Okay, so let's close this. And the next thing we want to do is install, let's do MariaDB. So already this is looking a lot smoother than the last time we tried this. So after we've finished installing MariaDB, I think we'll move on from MariaDB for now. We'll set it up later in class and deal with actually initializing the database and querying it. But for now, I think we'll just mainly make sure that it installs, which is better than it did before, and then we'll move on. Because the main point of this video is just to get everybody caught up with a working Raspberry Pi that has all the daemons installed, and then that way we can continue on. So while this is installing, I guess this would probably be a good time to point out. Oops, sorry, I bumped the keyboard there. Okay, so this would probably be a good time to point out. You don't usually, you don't need all of these servers, and in fact, you don't usually want them all enabled. So unless you want to be doing unencrypted FTP, there is no need to start the FTP server. You could just use SFTP for any file transfers that you need to do internally. Like if you're deploying code to your server, use SFTP. FTP is only meant for if you want to efficiently distribute files to the public. Well, to the public or to be able to upload files, but again, typically if you're uploading to your server, you probably want to be using encryption, at which point SFTP is the better option. Similarly, Samba. You're only going to be using Samba if you're actually using your server on a Windows network. If your server is running off in a data center somewhere on the internet, you probably don't want Samba running because the only other computers that are on the same network as it are other servers that are probably not even your servers. So you really don't want Samba exposed. Whereas if if the server happens to be on your corporate network, maybe you do want Samba enabled. Maybe your server is writing its logs out to a Samba share, and you share them so that you can easily access them from your admin console. What else? So VSFTPD, PHPMyAdmin is a little more useful than the other ones. You'll see it a little bit more commonly. Basically, anytime you have a database, PHPMyAdmin can come in handy. But also, maybe you don't need an administrative console on your server. Maybe all you need is to deploy your code and SSH in and run the MySQL command to load in your SQL seed file, and that's it. After you've set it up, you don't go in and you don't actually administer it directly. Maybe you don't need PHPMyAdmin. Same with Webmin. Everything that Webmin can do, you can do through either the GUI config tools or the command line config tools. Really, the only purpose of Webmin is that it makes it more convenient to have everything built into one single admin console. So most of it is convenience, but also if you're running a bunch of servers and they're remote from where you are, maybe you want to be able to access port 10,000 to administer them. Because if you're spinning up 5 servers, you can install Linux on them, get the web servers installed on them, turn on webmin, and then do everything else from your laptop. So webmin is mostly a convenience thing. phpMyAdmin is mostly a convenience thing. Samba and VSFTP are useful in and of their own right, but they're very situational as to whether or not you'd use them. Apache, MariaDB, and Tomcat are the ones that we're mainly going to be using for the course. So let's move on to the next one here. So MariaDB is done, although we will also check if it's running. There we go. MariaDB is the server. MariaDB server is the package, but MariaDB is the service name. And as we can see, it is running. Okay, so next we will do Samba. So as far as Samba goes, usually once you set up Samba, that will get your computer talking to the Windows network, and I think you can see it from the other machines, and it might even set up some default home shares. But typically it doesn't set up a whole lot out of the box. You actually have to go in and define your shares before you'll actually be able to see those folders remotely. So we'll probably talk about that in class a little bit more, because again, I wanted to focus this mainly on just doing the setup. But the important part is that you can set up shares, you can make them, you can name them whatever you want, you can make them readable or writable. So you can even have, not only can you use Samba for making files available from your server to other machines on the network, but you can also use it to write from other machines on the network. So for example, this would probably be pretty bad practice, but you could make a Samba share of your web root. And then you can just drag and drop HTML from your web dev machine. Again, probably not the best thing, because if through some mistake you end up exposing the Samba port, now your web root is completely exposed. But typically that would also be an amateur mistake too. You don't want to be opening up all the ports to your web server. You should really only be opening the ports that you specifically mean to. So in an ideal situation, opening Samba shouldn't be the end of the world, because you would only route port 80 and 2020 or port 80 and 22 to the outside world. That said, don't assume that people can't find another way to access things. So just because you have a server and it's not directly visible from the outside world doesn't necessarily mean that somebody won't find a way to either route a secure shell tunnel through one of your machines, or find what's called an arbitrary code execution vulnerability. So in the event that they can compromise a node that is externally visible and use that as a jumping off point onto your network, you can't assume that anything isn't going to be seen from the outside. So that is the one thing to be careful of, is if you do open a Samba port internally for convenience sake, you have opened a small vulnerability internally on your network that would take some work to get to, but if somebody's on your network, that might help them. Okay, so that's done installing. Did it crash? Here, let's try starting it and just see if it throws an error or... Okay, so that may or may not actually be running. It looks like, yeah, no, inactive. So we'll have to dig into that and see what the error condition for Samba is, but we'll save that for later. Because we're already making better progress than we were before. So Samba is the one thing we'll have to put a pin in. And let's move on to VSFTP. Okay. Yeah, we might as well change the config for that one because it's right here. So, we're going to open up etc, so /etc/vsftpd.conf. Oh, I forgot to actually add what command I'm running. So currently it was trying to run the config file. So sudo vi. And then the lines that we want to enable in here are anonymous enable, which is already uncommented, local enable, which is already uncommented, write enable, which is now uncommented, and local view mask equals 022, which is now uncommented. So by opening those, that should, I mean, we can't really test this from this system. This is something I would have to do from another machine. But once I save this file and restart, not Samba, VSFTPD. And we'll make sure that it actually started. There we go. Okay, so if I were to connect in from another one of my machines, I would see that when I go to ftp:// my host name, so in this case foobar42 on the network, or if I put in my IP address, when I go to that address in either a browser or FileZilla or WinSCP as we did in class, it should actually let me log in and see my home directory. So that's just opened up FTP to the world. And next let's do Tomcat. So for this one, we'll install Tomcat 10 because the information that we had that was talking about Tomcat 8 is quite out of date. So we want 10. There's 11 out now too, but when we looked at it in class, we saw that for the Raspberry Pi, the packages that are currently on the repo are for Tomcat 10. So that's what we'll do. Actually, while that installs, I should have... Is there an FTP client on here? No. But it might still work in Chromium, so let's try it. Oops. Because sometimes browsers have FTP support. So let's try it. FTP. I know back in the day IE had this, so if you put in an FTP link, IE would open it up as a folder and you could download stuff. Probably Chrome and Firefox. But anyway, FTP://127.0.0.1. No, it looks like it's trying to search, so Chromium does not know what to do with the FTP protocol. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll give up on that. Oh, what happened to my signal? updates are probably messing with the video. Okay. So while that's doing its thing, you know what? Let's open up another window here, because we should be able to run FTP from the command line. So let's try, one sec, FTP 127.0.0.1. Nope. Okay, it doesn't come with an FTP client built in. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It looks like stock Raspberry Pi does not come with an FTP client built in. Although that said, let's check the file manager. That might actually have FTP capability. It does. Okay, and I think I had turned anonymous users off, so let's log in as registered user. And this is the credentials that I set up in the Raspberry Pi imager when I was building the operating system card. So enter the credentials that you would enter here would be your credentials. And yeah, we'll tell it to forget the password so it doesn't store it anywhere. But if you were using this as like a connection from your workstation PC, you might want to actually store that. And there we go. Yeah, so when I connect to ftp://127.0.0.1 in File Manager, which has FTP capability, then I do actually see my my home directory. Or no, that's the root folder. This is my home folder. There we go. And because I've turned on write enable, I should also be able to drag and drop files in there. Let's just try. Yep. And let's also see, because I am admin, let's try creating files somewhere else. Actually, I probably can't write into www because I don't own that folder. So if I go in here and I try creating a file, this should actually fail. Yeah. So I can't create files in folders that I don't own, but if I were to SSH in, I could elevate myself to run an editor and then I can write files into that folder. Or I could just elevate the touch command if I just wanted to create an empty file. Okay, so Tomcat's making some progress here. Oh yeah, so don't mind whenever my video signal drops out there. That's just when you're installing updates. Sometimes I think it has to do with whenever something's updating a part of the system that affects the HDMI video output, it just momentarily blips out. So that's normal, especially during updates. so after this, we'll do PHP MyAdmin and Webmin, and then that should be it for now. Oh, and VNC, but we don't actually have to install anything for VNC. We just turn it on. Also, I'll mention this in the video description to give credit. But I guess since we have some time to kill now, would also be a good time to mention or to give credit to Kevin MacLeod for the music in the background. So this is this is Carefree by musician Kevin MacLeod, with some soothing ukulele music in the background to remind you that everything will be all right. Is it actually downloading anything? Oh, there we go. Wait, is this picking me up from the mic? The headset mic? No. No, it's not picking it up at all. Okay, good. Actually, let's try that. Maybe that audio is better. How does this sound? Oh. Does that sound better? Maybe? Hello. Can I hear myself when I talk? Not really. You know what? Yeah, I'll leave it on because I think it combines... That way it combines the two mics and it can't be any worse. Famous last words. But yeah, let's go with this. This is using the mic that's on my headset and the one that's on my desk. Twice the voice. 68%. Nice. Okay, so oh, that's the wrong mouse. I need this one. Okay, I don't need this. Let's close that. 70%. Honestly, I kind of wish that I could have actually done this in live stream mode, because this would have been a lot more interesting, actually being able to see the chat and interact with the audience instead of just talking to the echo of myself in my ear, talking over a random ukulele track. Oh, here we go. This is speeding up. I think messed up there. Almost. Come on, it's so close. Like 30 seconds left for the last 3%. Oh, almost. All right, there we go. Okay, so now one thing that I'm going to put a pin in for now is we've just set up Tomcat, so Tomcat's there, and it should be starting up and responding to pages, and or responding to requests with pages, and so we'll test that and make sure that that's working. But the other thing that we would normally do is we would probably want to go in and set up our Catalina settings so that when it boots up, our Tomcat either starts up the host manager so we can upload stuff, or it opens up the JMX port so we can talk to it from IntelliJ. We'll save that for later. Right now, all we want to do is just make sure that Tomcat is running, and then we'll deal with configuring it at another time. So let's go in. First, let's do sudo systemctl status Tomcat 10. There we go. Yeah, it's running. So now let's go in here and just check and make sure we can see it. And we'll go to 8080, which is the port it's running on by default. And there we go. So we do get Tomcat. Awesome. So Tomcat's working, and we'll come back and configure that later. Okay, so the next thing that we need. Let's do phpMyAdmin. Now, there's several different ways you can install phpMyAdmin. One of the simpler ways is you just download the zip file of all the source code for phpMyAdmin and you unpack it into your web root. And then you go and you navigate to that folder and it'll run you through the setup. I think there's a config file that you modify that you set up with your database credentials, and then it talks to the MySQL. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is you just install it with sudo apt-get, and then that actually installs it on the system. And I think it defines it as, I think it sets up its own virtual host in Apache. So it's not actually just sitting in your web root. And what was the other thing? Oh, and I think it automatically also sets it. No, it would start automatically because Apache is the thing that starts. But yeah, so installing it through apt-get does some additional setup for you. So that's the way that we're going to do it here. So phpMyAdmin is another one of these ones that when it finishes installing, we're just going to move on because we didn't set up, we didn't go through the full setup for MariaDB yet. So there's not really any point in going through, in actually using phpMyAdmin to access the database. But so the other thing we want to do is here we press space to select Apache 2. And then tab to move over to OK. So what this is doing is it's telling phpMyAdmin which web server it's trying to configure to work with, because phpMyAdmin, being that it's written in PHP, it can be served up by multiple different web servers. It doesn't care whether Apache is the front end or light HTTPD. You could probably even configure Nginx to do this. It just doesn't come with it. It doesn't come with an auto configurator for it. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't. So the point is, this works with any arbitrary web server. Should be almost done. We'll go with no because we don't have the database yet. So later on, we'll actually run this. Okay, so that's installed phpMyAdmin. Well, let's see if we can take a look in Apache and see if we can see the changes it made. There we go. So it added in phpMyAdmin.conf, which is a symlink, and if we look at that symlink, we'll probably see where it actually resides is a phpMyAdmin folder somewhere. Let's do ls-la, just out of curiosity. So ///////////////// phpMyAdmin. So it's actually in /etc/phpMyAdmin. Oops. My. There we go. So that's where all the config files went, and then it just creates a symlink to etc apache conf available and conf enabled, which is what tells it that it actually needs to run that config file. And that tells Apache where to look to serve up phpMyAdmin. You know what? Let's just take a quick peek at the file. Okay, so this is kind of what this is a little bit what the virtual host configuration will look like later on when we get into it. Similar, it'll have these structures. It'll use a virtual host folder instead, or a virtual host tag instead. But inside of it, it'll be defining the route that gets served up as that host. So it'll look kind of like this, but with different tags. Anyway, let's move on from phpMyAdmin. Last thing to install is webmin. So this one, I'm expecting this command will fail the first time because we can't just install webmin from the central repository, but let's just check and see just in case. Yeah, so this should fail. Yeah. So the one that we actually want to run is curl-o. And this is the command that you actually get from the webmin website. So when you go there to find out what is the process for installing a Linux, they tell you, okay, so before you can run apt-get, you should run this curl command. So what this is doing, let me just type it out first and then I'll explain it. https:// GitHub. Okay, that looks good. Yes. So what this is doing, curl is a command that you use to make web requests to servers on the internet and save that output somewhere on your system. So very similar to another tool that's very popular called wget. You'll see these used all the time in setup scripts and stuff because they're very common where somebody they want to give you a command that you can run that will go and just fetch a script onto your system and then run it. And lo and behold, that's exactly what this is doing. So curl -o is telling it what file to output to, and it's saying, all right, I want to save a file in this current folder. It's because it doesn't specify any folders, so it'll save it in my home folder, and it'll call it webmin setup repos.sh. And what is it saving there? Well, this right here, this URL. So everything that follows, the HTTP, blah, 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 all the way to the end of this file name, That's the file that it's going to fetch, and it's going to write it out to the same file name locally. If you don't specify -o, I'm pretty sure curl will actually write it out as the full URL, so you'll actually end up with a file called http:// blah 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 blah, like the full URL of the page. So if you want to save it by a specific file name, that's where you want to pass in -o and give it the name of this script. So, which just happens to match the file on the server. They just want you to download the file. So if we run that, there we go. It saved the file. Now, when we run sh, so that sh is one of the shells. So we're telling it, I want to run a shell script with the sh shell. And we want to pass it webmin setup repos .sh. Yeah. Okay. And so that should have updated the sources for our repositories. And so now, when I run this command, it'll actually see the webmin package, and it'll see all of its dependencies, and it'll go and fetch everything and install it for me. And then that's one of the servers that we will test. We'll check and make sure that we're actually able to access port 10,000, and we should get an admin page. One sec, did I do something wrong? Raw GitHub user content.com/webmin/webmin/master/webmin setup repos. Oh, hang on. Because we just changed the sources, let's tell it to update the repositories first. No. Okay. Let me just double check their website and see if there's anything I missed here. So yeah, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to move on for now because webmin's not super important. The main thing is... Oh, hang on. I did put in the URL wrong. Let's try that. Not that it should have mattered. HTTP should have worked too, but... curl-o webmin setup repos.sh https://raw.github user content yeah .com/webmin webmin setup repos.sh. Yeah. Okay. I mean, the HTTPS shouldn't have mattered, but let's give it a try. Oh, that is taking a little while longer. I'm kind of wondering if when it first downloaded, it might not have downloaded anything at all, which would be why that script silently failed and why this one is telling me that I have to elevate. So let's run that as root. There we go. That's what we should have seen. So yeah, the problem with the first execution was that I put in HTTP, I put in the wrong URL, so it didn't give me anything. And when I ran the script, it didn't do anything. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. Okay. And it might have already done an update, so let's try it without. There we go. Oh yeah, the other thing we were going to do before we wrap up is enabling VNC. So we'll finish installing this, we'll test and make sure it's accessible, then we'll enable VNC, and then we'll end the video. Almost. Come on. Here we go. Come on. Almost done. Oh, there we go. Come on. All right, there we go. Now, let's test one last thing on this, and then we're done with Webmin, and we'll enable VNC, and then we're done. So, by default, Webmin should install, and it should start up on port 10,000. So first, let's just check and see if it started. Yes, it is running. Okay. Okay, it's squawking about an authentication failure, but that shouldn't be... I don't think that's a deal breaker. There we go. Okay, so it didn't like that I tried accessing HTTP. It routed me to HTTPS, and now it's squawking because it's got a self-signed cert, which is fine. So what we actually do is we just go in here into advanced, and we tell it, yes, I am fine with this. This is my server. I know that it's not attacking me. There we go. Now let's try my LBeaters account. There we go. So that's what Webmin looks like. It starts off with a little dashboard here to give you an idea of your system resources. And over here on the left, it's got a bunch of different menus that you can navigate through that'll allow you to administer different aspects of your system. So for example, Apache. One of the reasons that we use Webmin in the first place is that it's a much more convenient way of modifying the system configurations than to open up config files in Vi. Actually, just for comparison here, cat/etc/Apache2. Oops. Yeah, let's cat apache2.conf. Oh, okay, that's actually the shorter version of the config file. Yeah, this one's actually pretty minor. But Apache config files, they used to be a lot bigger. Where I think they've split it off into several different files now. But it used to be that you'd have one massive Apache conf with like several sections in it, and it was absolutely huge and a bit of a small nightmare to update. Well, unless you know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing and you go in and you modify only the section that you care about and you're careful about it, then it's not the worst thing. But there's a lot to know about it. So the point is, usually, webmin is a much more convenient way of changing that. So we might come back to this later when we actually do the virtual host configuration. The other thing might be worth taking a look at. You can also set up MariaDB in here. When it loads. There we go. So we can take a look at what the databases are that are in there right now, which is currently just got the stock databases that it comes with. But we can go in there and create databases. We can add new tables. We can do most of the stuff that we can do in PHPMyAdmin. But this is a much simpler interface than PHPMyAdmin. So if you're actually planning on doing any significant amount of SQL maintenance in this, I would recommend using PHPMyAdmin. This is mainly just to get your server set up. This is the other one. So we got Samba. You can configure stuff in here, which again might be a little bit nicer than trying to go in and modify that big config file. And it also has config for your SSH server. So this is probably where, I think if we look under authentication, it should have an option. There we go. So this is one of those options that I was talking about that usually I like to turn off on my servers, where if I'm exposing a SSH server to the internet, I will usually disable root login, because that way anybody who's coming and attacking my server and just trying to guess the root password, they can guess until the end of the universe and they'll never get in because there is no root account. So it's not perfect. If they can do their research on you and find out what your usernames are, then they can actually do a more targeted attack. But at the very least, this prevents you from being susceptible to the bots that are just scanning, looking for root accounts. So I would set that to no. You know what? Let's save it on here. Anything else? No. Some of these options are useful, but we don't really want them on right now. Actually, one thing that is worth pointing out is this is also where you can configure passwordless login. So you can actually generate keys that you then install on your client machine, and it identifies your machine uniquely to the server without having to use a password. So when you connect, you just open it up, the key exchanges back and forth, and done, you're in. You don't have to enter a password or anything, it is a much more secure way of doing things. You can also set up, I think GitHub supports that, where you can set up the key on your machine so that you don't have to enter the password every time you want to push to GitHub. And it also makes it so that you can't brute force the account. You'd have to brute force the key at that point, because you're not just accepting a pair of username and password, which are just two separate strings. You're actually expecting a full cryptographic key. So it is more secure, but it takes more setup, and so that's usually what you'll see is just regular password authentication. But I have seen companies that actually do use key-based authentication. So we'll save that. There we go. And we'll leave webmin alone for now. And the last thing that I wanted to do is we'll go in and enable VNC. I'll show you two different ways to get in here. So you can either go in through the Raspberry Pi menu up here and go down to Preferences, Raspberry Pi Configuration. And so this is the more convenient and user-friendly way of setting up your Raspberry Pi. As you can see, it's got nicely organized menus, and you're not having to navigate through a console-based application. But this isn't always available if you're running headless, for example. So if you deploy a Raspberry Pi that just joins the network and is only responding to network traffic, and you don't have a monitor hooked up to it, you might not really be able to access this. You might have to SSH in and use Raspberry config instead. So we could, right here, we could just hit this little switch right here and hit OK, and that would turn on VNC. But I'm going to show you the other way of doing it too. So in the event that you don't have access to the GUI, or you, for whatever reason, don't want to use the GUI, from the command line, you just do sudo raspi-config. There we go. And then down here in interface options, we go down to VNC and tell it, yes, I would like VNC server to be enabled. And then it will make the changes to configuration. And then we use the right arrows to navigate to the select and finish buttons. And we select finish. There we go. I think that's the name of it. No, let's just try VNC, because that's the package name, but it might, daemon might be VNC. Okay, I don't know. There should be a service on there for VNC, and it is probably running, but I can't remember what the name of it is right now, so we won't spend any more time on that. But at this point, I should be able to go to another machine and open up VNC and connect into this host, and it'll relay all my keyboard and mouse controls as if I was actually sitting at that computer. But I can't really demonstrate that without being on another machine, and this is currently set up to only stream the Pi. So we'll experiment with that in class. But really, all you should see is when you start up VNC and point it at your so you start up VNC. You point it at either your host name or your IP address, and you give it the credentials that we set up at the start in the Raspberry Pi imager. And if you enter everything correctly, it will show you your desktop, and then you can move the mouse and control it. Anything else before I terminate this? No, I think that's about it. So we saw webmin's working. We still have to come back and configure the database in phpMyAdmin. And we should play around with the Samba shares a little bit more, but we'll save that for when we're actually on a Windows network. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to shut down my Raspberry Pi here. One thing to note, actually, so the two ways that we usually shut the Pi down are either sudo shutdown -r now if we want to reboot it, or if we want to shut it down and pull the power, we do sudo halt. And so that's going to bring down my Raspberry Pi OS, and then it'll bring it down to a state where it says your system is now halted, and then it just stays there, and then you can unplug it. Anything else I want to add to that? No. Let's Let's do a halt, and this should actually, it should be able to stream this because it'll still continue outputting HDMI right up until the point where it turns itself off. Okay, a little bit less verbose than I was expecting. And my Pi has stopped blinking, so I just made sure that the yellow-green processing light, or the activity light, is off. So let's pull the power now. There we go. My Pi is configured and ready to continue on with the lessons. So I'm going to stop recording and upload this to YouTube. Follow along. We'll actually, we have to sort out the SD cards. So if you have an SD card that's a good quality SD card, you can start on the video. Otherwise, we'll figure out something about the SD cards, and then you can follow along with the video and get caught up. So yeah, I'm going to stop the video. Everyone have a good night. I'm going to go to bed. See you tomorrow.